Today's topic, as you're probably aware, it's about the Forrester research that shows that 82% of companies have regretted their spend management decision. And just to very quickly, just as a bit of background, my name is Gus. I previously worked at Procter & Gamble, Thales, Oracle, and now Ivalua. For those that don't know, Ivalua are a privately owned unicorn. There was a plan to have an IPO this year, but recent events have delayed this. But my intention today is not to talk much at all about Ivalua today. My background was operations. I was the guy with a stopwatch pushing the process. As you can imagine, I was loved and admired by everyone. And then I moved to the glorious light of the vendor to be even more loved and admired, I guess. And I'm going to deliberately avoid using slides today. Having been on the customer side, this has made me very, very allergic to IT vendors' version of thought leadership. I think we've all had enough of that. And my hope for this round table is that we can talk as openly as you feel comfortable about that 82%, about that failure rate and the root causes of that. And what do we believe to be the root causes and the reasons for this? Or is it actually not that bad? And to be clear, this is not one way. I will happily offer up some of the challenges I saw on the customer side. And a key one for me was integrations. It's a fundamental part of any of these programs, but it's never really included in demos. You have usability, you have maybe commercials, etc. But fundamentally, what you don't have is an assessment of the integration capability. So as the first example, is there anyone here that would like to offer up some experiences as to reasons why they think that there is this 82% reject rate? Normal silence. We anticipated this. No? Well, I'll give a second example then. We had one, it was a particular project I did probably 8 or 9 years ago now, where the vendor promised an automated integration process with an incredibly flexible ETL. And the actual reality of this was that the on-site vendor would download the file onto the USB, take it home, do some work, and then upload it. And then when that automated ETL process went on holiday to Magaluf, the whole thing fell down. And it was only at that point that we discovered exactly what had gone wrong. This doesn't strike me as being an uncommon situation. I get the sense that a lot of times that this kind of workaround in this process is happening. Now, is that because vendors are just misleading people, or is that internal processes? No volunteers?
Well, it sounds like overpromising.
Oh, perhaps it's the planning side of things, maybe as well, which sometimes, not all the time, of course, but sometimes might be slightly lacking. Planning for eventualities as well, and continually, looking at the outcomes that need to be achieved within a particular project, and perhaps, challenging things that might go wrong before they do go wrong.
I think you've touched on something quite important here, which is, particularly in complex IT, it's very, very hard to know everything. And I think one of the things that I've seen happen is that users get quite nervous. They often have workarounds, they have a process that they have to follow, but it's maybe not always fully documented. And then when someone comes along saying, we're going to digitize or we're going to automate this, one, you're saying, I want you to do a brain dump and give me everything. Everything that you do in Excel, we want you to kind of cover off and capture. And then obviously there's always a bit of concern about that. So what are you going to do with that information? IT. How are you going to hurt me? Are you going to make my life simpler? Are you going to force me to have to go for another job, etc.? So there's always an element of defensiveness, and it's really, really hard. I think the nature of these things is that there are so many different specific elements and configurations and bespoke bits that actually getting a proper set of documentation that describes the reality is really, really hard. So having a BCP, having some kind of contingency is really hard, which is why you can end up with someone just taking a USB drive and, no one really knowing about it for weeks and weeks and months and months. Obviously, these things are a lot more controlled now, but it's really hard. And from my experience, it's an interesting, I've never quite understood this, and maybe there's some thoughts about this. I've never quite understood some of the time pressure that's put on RFP processes. It just seems to create a lot of exposure on specifications. So what you're doing is you're taking an active, usable process that people have to live through in terms of, let's say it's spend. Let's say it's spend analytics or spend management or something. That's a real live process, and you're trying to capture that in, say, Excel, and then you're forcing different people to compose a response in 300 characters in one cell, and then you're going to mark that. That process seems to inevitably lead to some deltas. So what you get ultimately, I mean, another example, they bought an AP tool, an automation tool for AP. They paid for it, everything was fine, everyone was great, and then they looked at it and they realized that they bought the tool, but they hadn't bought any implementation. Just completely missed it out. That is any number of failures along the whole end line. But quite clearly part of it was just rushed. There was too much kind of acceleration and speed through it.
I think
And to your point, Gus, it's
sorry, Chris. Sorry, Chris.
I would say that one of the big issues I always notice is that the software writers really want to sell the consultancy, but they still insist on selling money for their software. And it makes life difficult when you've already committed an amount of money for the software to contemplate
I totally
where everything goes wrong.
Yeah.
The other issue I'd say as well is that typically you're faced with a salesman who's selling all the good points, and you don't see the techie until it's too late in the process. And that's
I have no idea what you're talking about, Mr. Fitzgerald. Who have you? No, never. No, it is a thing. There's this kind of competing pressure, which is there are targets on everyone. Everyone has these kind of objectives. So I won't name them. I don't. But we're going through a process with one customer at the moment, and you can see that there's a procurement kind of objective, and the procurement objective I get. But fundamentally, the only way that really works is if it hurts someone else in a year's time. And that's going to probably be the user and the vendor and everyone. Do you know what I mean? If you want to squeeze something now, that department, that siloed team, they're good. They're great. But when it moves on to the next part of the chain, that's suddenly where you get this kind of challenge. And your point around the partners, yeah, I totally take the point. It's an interesting thing where we hear from customers who, whenever they want to make a change, so let's say, for example, I don't know, there's a new requirement on vendor management, and you want to be able to include a new requirement in terms of your governance, for example. We got told one customer was going to be charged over £40,000 to add one field to that. And you're like, you're just bewildered. And, as I said, we're not here to, I'm genuinely not here to talk about Ivalua, but that is very, very strange to us. That it should be you that should be able to do that. It should not be less flexible than Excel. If someone can do it in Excel, you should kind of be able to do it here, but it should be able to be auditable and controlled, and you know where you are. Not, how do I have to find money for the partner? Because then you get that really toxic relationship where the partner's kind of incentivized to find profit. They're like, I've worked with partners in the past, and I always came to the conclusion with some of them, which was if they ever accidentally got an email for a Christmas party, they'd go, that's not a Christmas party. If you give us the same budget for the Christmas party, we'll organise you a Christmas party. And then they'll come back and say, by the way, the scope's changed on the Christmas party. We need another 100,000. We need. Sorry, Carl.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Gus, to your point on RFPs just beforehand, I was just sort of thinking openly here, wonder what everyone thinks. Sometimes when an RFP is put together, it's a plethora of it's almost information dump, but yes, useful in part, but almost sometimes losing sight of not just what the current state is, what is the outcome, why are we even doing this, and what do we want to get to, and how could we measure those outcomes to measure success per individual, per group, for the company as a whole, and how's that success being achieved, as opposed to there's a plethora of a tick list of 1,000 pages, which I think all of us have been involved in.
That's another really good point. I think, because when we say, was it success, I think it's really hard, particularly in the way in which these things work, is to actually define what success looks like. So people might have a definition of what they want to get. So let's say they're looking at some process to improve, I don't know, digitize their invoices, say, and they have an idea. They've done some benchmarking, they've worked out. So currently it's taking us, I don't know, 8 days end to end. That's not good enough. We want to hit 3 days. That's world class. Having a definition of that and then saying, we're going to work our way up to that point. Having a metric and saying, this is what we need to do, I think is really important. Because lots of people, I think, they have a hope rather than an ROI in mind. And then afterwards, everyone gets angry and upset.
I mean, I think I'm from the SME environment at the moment, and I think it's amazing when we see that we can buy accounting software for £42 a month, and they throw in free AP processing, and you compare and contrast to all the big ones, and you just wonder whether there is that much difference really, or whether the model is maybe more sensible.
I think,
and certainly from an SME environment as well, the packaging that the vendor puts in the software decides. I mean, we bought an accounting system, and they wanted to charge us extra for a corrections module. If you made a mistake in input, you had to buy another module to fix that. You know, that's
not bad at all. If you can get away with that. Slightly off topic, I remember, this is a very, very strange thing to suddenly come to mind, but there was a company that used to sell fruit machines and pinball machines. And then what they did was they came up with, through a separate company, a device that would allow you to cheat the fruit machine or the pinball machine, little magnet. And then once that had gone out there and they kind of, through this separate company, they then came out with another product, which was something to block that thing from working. Like, it's good money if you can, I mean, it's not bad, like, game to play, is it? But yeah, no, it's an interesting thing in terms of, if you look at the list of, like, these lists have been going around for years in the academic research, like the top 10 kind of critical success factors, and you always see the same stuff. So, do you have exec sponsorship? I think that's really important. Do you have user adoption? And one of the things we have seen a lot is what gets defined in 2020 and what goes live in 2021 has changed. Your business has changed, your stakeholders have changed, your users have changed. And oftentimes what you bought is already just a bit out of date. And having, again, you go back to the point, how do you make a change? How do we get something in that can work? Is it flexible enough, or is it just going to throw up obstructions? Is it going to be painful? Can I put you under pressure, Candice? Have you done any kind of ERP or any kind of project at your side?
Yeah, we have done some projects. So we implemented a new ERP system probably 2 or 3 years ago.
How are you feeling? Are you okay now? Have you recovered? Is that all good?
Well, yes and no, if I'm honest. So I wasn't actually...
Not unusual.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wasn't actually there at the time when they did that. I started about 6 months after. So all you hear then is all war stories about how far they've gone, what's been the issues and so on. And I think one of the big issues I found when kind of walking into that situation was everyone assumes when you do these ERP implementations or something like that, that the new system is going to be like the magic bullet that solves every single problem that you've got in the process. Yeah. And the realization that it doesn't do that, and you've spent all this money, suddenly means that the users then don't want to adopt it because they go, well, it's not solved that issue over there, which I was really hoping for. And you kind of go, well, the system was never going to do that for you. The system can only do what it can do.
Yeah, no, I think there's an element where, in the same way I think it was mentioned earlier about the sales guy, overselling it a bit. And obviously what happens is, there's nothing but sales people in that process. So the person who's taking the pitch has to sell it internally, and then they have to sell it to like finance. You've got to get over the hurdle rate, and every single kind of line needs, for want of a better phrase, a little bit of magic dust. So will it wash my car in the morning? Oh yeah, definitely. It'll get, no, you want a coffee? No, definitely, absolutely. Just move. And then when you eventually get to the reality, you go, okay, now we have this thing. And I think your point around those kind of war stories, I think that's also really powerful, because what happens is people get fatigued. They go, oh, another thing, really. And I think having a kind of much more modular nature. So if you say, actually, this is where we have a genuine need, and this is where we can give really quick results for these people. All right, yes, we've got a bigger program. There's much more work. Let's not get too greedy. Let's make sure our eyes are not bigger than our stomach. If we can hit those guys, suddenly it's like, wait there, that internal team are really good. They could select a product. That vendor, they've done a good job, right? Now we can get a bit more greedy and we can go, right, what's the thing that's really gonna, and you start stepping it up. But you get the low-hanging fruit and you progress, and suddenly people are happy and happy. I think that's an easier proposition in SaaS than it used to be on-premise. On-premise, no one wants to do that. You want to do that once every 10 years and then go and rest in a monastery for 5 years, I think. I don't want to do that again. I think that's important. But your point around the experience. Mr. Clark, I don't know if can I put you under pressure, sir?
I can. Apologies, I've got to leave the meeting shortly. Funnily enough, we're implementing an ERP system. We have a parent company in Madrid who brought along some consultants. Having worked in that field for 7 years, I wouldn't employ them. They're not doing a good job at the moment. So the purpose for me is to understand other people's pain, so to speak, and successes. So we are probably 6 months into another 12-month process.
Yeah. And how do you, you think they're doing okay or not? You think it's broadly all right, or?
No, I think it's there's just no outline plan, where it's supposed to go. It's heading for a car crash, but we're trying to kind of put the brakes on before it gets to that stage.
That's good. You can see it coming.
Well, yeah, it's that funny you say that, Chris. It's that bad that the CEOs actually started calling meetings with the consultants to say, what the f is going on here?
No, it is a really hard thing. It's one of those things where doing an ERP change and any kind of, spend anything involving the money running through the business, it is a difficult thing because the tentacles go everywhere.
Mike,
and everyone will feel it ultimately. So,
how are you doing?
I think,
Hey, Gus.
I understand the challenge. I do.
Yeah.
Hey, Gus, Brendan here.
Just one sec.
The way you were describing this, it sounds like a self-inflicted wound.
Cheers, Alan. Sorry, good Brendan.
Hang on.
Yes, it sounds like it's a self-inflicted wound, or
Shitty.
the vendor
Thank
can
you
actually
so much for
contribute to
sending
their
it.
own downfall a little
Really,
bit
really appreciate it.
by not having a specific process in place
Yeah.
to avoid these pitfalls. And I was listening to you and I was thinking about the analogy of the garden swing. You may be familiar with that.
Oh, yeah, the project management, what the project managers saw, what the business analysts saw,
Yeah, exactly. And I think that kind of does it for me. I think that analogy, if everyone else is familiar with it, it's what the customer actually wanted, what the salesman thought the customer wanted, what the solution service provider within the customer thought the salesman said that the customer wanted, and so on. And in the end, instead of getting that simple garden swing, what you end up with is something that defies gravity, actually. See the final picture. And then the other piece to this is that, IT should always expect a black swan. So all swans are white, but no, they're not, because there is a black swan. When you hit a black swan, what the hell do you do?
Yeah. No, I think your point around IT is well made. It's it's an interesting. It kind of involved, but it's really hard to know how you test some of the IT side. So let's say a very simple process. I'm sure everyone's bored of seeing it. It's like a normal login process. So that's a user thing. You go, right, fine. But actually making sure that the system or whatever it is here will talk to the 7 other systems. How do you evidence that? And what you'll get, my background will allow you to see, I'm aware of every single reason and excuse we can give for not showing that. Because no one wants to do that. But there are some one or two exceptions out there who can and encourage it, because it's not exciting, but actually it's fundamental to ROI. Mr. Fitzgerald, I suspect that you may have done one or two pieces of work in.
Yeah, I mean, my most relevant piece, I think, was as a user group chairman of a software way back in the late 80s. And the big thing that we did then, which I really don't see anymore, is that the vendors seem to love the customer when they're the customer, but post sale they sort of lose focus. And what we did as the user group was we actually divided into two different sections: the techie boys, so they could talk about that, and then the sort of silo boys, so we had the sales functions and the purchasing functions, etc.
Yeah.
And we got together as separate groups and came up with desired improvements to give to the vendor. And I remember the best year we gave them 300 improvements to work on, and they selected 100, and all of us were just incredibly happy that progress was made as a collective. And the other thing we did was that when the vendor shipped the software, they shipped the user group grid, if you like, which included all the specifics that each of us had invested in, and we offered to engage with other customers to get those upgrades or tweaks or special reports round the back, rather than the vendor selling them 100 times. And if they sold them 100 times and charged us 100th or a 50th, then we would all be happy. But if you feel shafted all the time, you just don't.
100. The number of times in the past I've come across a situation where the customer has found, or the partner and a customer have found some way to activate some part or functionality without the software vendor being aware, and it seems like a good idea at the time. But I don't know, hands up, anyone wants to go through an Oracle audit? No, really not a good idea. Really not a good idea in the long run. So there's a thing of, you create this kind of, you compel this type of behavior, and then ultimately you're like, okay. And to your other point around the kind of like the sales guy disappearing, that's just, objectives, detail, and describe behavior. It's a really simple thing. If the objective is not customer satisfaction based or anything based like that, you're just not going to be interested. So as a case in point, so my time at Oracle, they only introduced renewal objectives for the sales team 2019. Maybe 2018. So the point is, it's like, why? Yeah, the business is telling me where my priority is, and I think particularly in SaaS, the key word there is service. It's not the software. It's kind of like if you go to a provider and they said we've got 10 million pigeons out in Deptford in a factory, and we're going to process your data. You kind of ultimately don't care. You just want the result. Whatever. The key thing you want is the service part, not the software, however it's being done. And I think objectives will change and change and change. So on our side, it's contract. We stay with you throughout it. So suddenly that instinct to go, well, we're going to say yes because it won't be our problem in 12 months' time is just less prevalent. It's not. I think we're coming to the end of our time a little bit here. I'm not sure. It may be that Elena has been kidnapped.
I think she went off clutching her phone.
We all need to raise the ransom then, I guess. So
it's probably an ERP project that's gone wrong, and she has to go into a crash meeting. All things being equal. Anyway, I hope this is entertaining from my side. So thank you very much for attending. Normal rules: if you want to reach out, don't hesitate. And
thanks a lot, Gus. Much appreciated. Nice style.
Yes, thank you very much.